Don't you hate it when that happens to you? When it does, you need this and this and this. When it happens to me, I always know where to go. When you've got professionals on your side, your problems don't stand a chance. What are you waiting for? Contact them today and let them take care of your problems.
Hi, this is Herdy from Extreme Wizards Digitizing, and today we're going to be talking about digitizing for 3D puff embroidery. In today's video, we're going to be using the Melco Design Shop digitizing software version 10. Before we get started, there's a couple of things I'd like to go over with you. When embroidering with 3D foam, you want to make sure that you set the presser foot height on your machine to the height of your 3D foam. If you don't, what's going to end up happening is the presser foot is going to crush your 3D foam, and areas where you have overlapping stitches will have a dramatic difference in height from areas where there are no overlapping stitches. The type of foam that I like to use when I'm doing 3D puff embroidery is a dense foam. I find that the denser foam gives you a nicer square edge look to your designs and columns. Another advantage to denser foam is that it cuts easier, making cleaning a lot easier. Another important factor is you should try and match the color of your foam with the color of your thread. That way, if there's any bits and pieces of foam sticking out, they'll be less noticeable if the colors match. One thing you should always try to avoid is to piggyback foam to get a higher effect on the 3D puff. It never cuts properly, it's very messy, and it makes for a tough cleanup job. When setting the tensions on your machine, you want to make sure that you set the tensions to looser than normal. Tight tensions have a tendency of pushing down on the foam and crushing the foam. When embroidering 3D puff, I like to use a bigger needle, such as an 80-12. The 80-12 needle will give you a bigger bang for your buck, making bigger holes and making a better cut. As you can see, I've already segmented the JPEG image that we're going to be using in this project. The purple areas indicate the amount of overlap that we're going to be using when two columns come together. The green area indicates the capping stitch that we use at the end of every column. In 3D embroidery, you have to cap every single one of your columns, whether it's with a capping stitch such as the one indicated in green, or a tapered off end. The red area indicates sections where two columns cross over each other and could possibly pull them apart. So what we do is we lay down a couple of stitches across that area to act as a bridge and hold them together when you do come across with the cutting stitch. When digitizing with 3D foam, if you get too close to the edge with your stitching, what has a tendency of happening is once you pull off the 3D foam, the stitches at the very edge of your column will have a tendency to fall off your column, and it doesn't look very nice. So by us stopping a millimeter from the edge, it prevents that and you end up with a nicer finish. When digitizing for 3D foam, the densities that you're going to be using are at least twice as dense as you would normally use for any other type of embroidery. The density that I prefer to use is 0.18 millimeters, and I turn off my short stitches. The reason for that is if you don't turn off your short stitches, what has a tendency of happening is you have little bits and pieces of foam sticking through the areas inside curves. For the capping stitch, you don't need as much density. In fact, you don't want too much density because you're going to crush the end of your foam. So for capping densities, I use a 0.25 millimeter density, but I also turn on my short stitches because the short stitches will be hidden inside the column, so you're not going to see any of that. And any foam that is poking through will be covered up by the column stitch once it comes over the capping stitch. Okay, so what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be setting our values for our column stitches. So we're going to set our density to 0.18 millimeters, turning off our short stitches. We're not going to need any underlay, so we're going to shut that off. Next is I like setting my pull compensation or the pull offset to zero point 0.2 millimeters. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the parameters for our short stitches. In Design Shop, I like to have my width at 100% and my threshold at 70%. Other softwares probably use different values. For my tie-off stitch in Design Shop, I like using style number 2, and I like using numbers 2 stitches for the tie-off stitch. If you have too many stitches in your tie-off stitch, what ends up happening is you have your foam being crushed and you have these little holes showing up in your embroidery that don't look very nice. Next, we're going to be setting our running stitch length to 1.7 millimeters. I like 1.7 millimeters because if you use the default value of 2.5 millimeters, I find that it has a tendency of sometimes poking outside a column when you're turning a curve on a very narrow column. So 1.7 follows the curve very well. Okay, let's get to some actual work right now. So what we're going to do first is we're going to start with a running stitch along the center of the columns. What this will do is it will hold the 3D foam in place so we can do the rest of the work without it moving too much. And we're now going to digitize the capping stitch. Now the density that I have set here for the capping stitches are set for just a regular column stitch so it's way too dense, but we'll be changing that later on. It's just faster this way. We'll digitize the whole logo and then we'll just select the cap stitches and put the right density and turn on our short stitches for the capping stitch. Okay, and now we're going to start with our cap stitch. Notice how I start short of the top of the column. Again, we don't want it to be right at the edge of the end of the column, because once you pull off the 3D foam, it's more likely than not going to fall off the edge. And we're going to be coming up to the overlapping part of the column. The reason that we overlap and not continue all the way to the end is I don't want to have any tie-off stitches on top of capping stitches, because it's just way too many stitches in one particular area. So what we do is we just come back and close off the column with an overlapping row and put in our tie-off stitches in an area that doesn't have as many stitches. So again, we're going to do a running stitch down the center of the column for the F to hold the 3D foam in place. Digitizing the capping stitches at the end of the columns. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting down a couple of stitches where the two columns meet. Again, that's just to hold the foam together so that when you come on top with the cutting stitch, it doesn't pull the columns apart. Now, one thing that you always want to keep in mind when you're digitizing two columns that are going to be crossing each other is you try to never lay down stitches perpendicular to each other, because they tend to open up the stitches on one of the columns and you see the material showing through the stitches. So if you come in on an angle, it minimizes that effect. Again, you can see that I am staying 1 millimeter away from the edge of the column. And once again, I'm going to do an overlap of the columns because I do not want to finish my column on top of a capping stitch. I don't want the tie-off stitch to be on top of my capping stitch. And for the second half, we're just going to do a copy paste. When I digitize, I like to put on a little bit that I haven't put any bridging stitches on areas that are overlapping, the purple areas, and that's because I normally don't. I really only put it in when there are two columns that cross each other and not two columns that are overlapping each other. But I did it in this case here for the letter D, just so that you can compare on your own, and then you can decide. Some people prefer to put them in, some people prefer not to. I'm of the not to variety. Okay, for the three, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using two different types of capping stitches. The regular green one that we've been doing here, capping off the wide parts. But then what we're going to do is we're going to cap off the middle part of the three with a tapering cap. So those are the two basic methods of capping columns in 3D embroidery. Okay, so now, like I said at the beginning of the video, we're going to go in and we're going to change the values of our capping stitch because we had it set at 0.18, which is the density for a cutting stitch, but we don't want that for a capping stitch. We want that at 0.25. And we are going to turn on our short stitches. Again, those short stitches will happen inside the curve, which will be covered up by the cutting stitch. Okay, you'll be able to take this design now and send it to the embroidery machine and get your 3D puff embroidery done. Okay, so now once the embroidery is done, all you have to do now is just pull off the 3D foam, and the bits and pieces that are left you can go in with a X-Acto knife or any sharp tool and pick them off. Now there might be some little pieces of foam sticking out. You can poke them back in, and then there might be like really small ones, kind of like fuzz. The best way to get rid of those is to use a heat gun. It'll just shrink inside the embroidery and it'll be nice and neat. Okay, that's it. If you found this tutorial to be helpful, I would greatly appreciate it if you can give us a thumbs up down at the bottom of your screen. You can also sign up to our YouTube channel, or if you wish to be notified of future videos, you can just go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter. Hopefully we'll see you again in the near future. This is Herdy with Extreme Wizards, And thank you very much.